In 1744, Frederick the Great of Prussia faced a problem. His kingdom was hungry. Decades of war had devastated agricultural production, and the existing crop rotation could not sustain the population that needed feeding. Frederick had known the solution for years. The potato grew faster than grain, yielded more calories per acre than almost anything else in the European agricultural repertoire, and thrived on poor soil that would kill wheat. Yet nobody would eat it, and no amount of explaining the nutritional case had changed that. Prussian peasants had declined the potato for a century. They believed it caused leprosy, or that it was pig fodder, or that it was connected to nightshade, which it was, though tomatoes and peppers share that family, and nobody was refusing those. Whatever the fear, the outcome was the same. People went hungry next to potato fields they refused to plant. So Frederick did something that has no clean equivalent in modern agricultural policy. He ordered potato fields planted across Prussia, then posted royal guards around the fields with instructions to protect the crop, and to make sure the guards were visible, but to look the other way when peasants came at night. The guards did not stop anyone. People broke in, dug up the plants, and took them home. Because obviously, the reasoning went, something the king was guarding that carefully had to be worth eating. Within a decade, Prussian peasants were growing potatoes without any compulsion. By some estimates, Prussian agricultural output increased enough in the following decades to reduce the frequency and severity of famine years. The cause was not new land or new technology. It was a crop that had been available all along, and a population that had finally decided it was food. Frederick had solved a nutrition crisis not through edict or enforcement, but through the manipulation of perceived value. The vegetable nobody would accept when offered for free became the one everyone wanted when they believed it was forbidden. That story is the potato in miniature, a crop that humans have underestimated, refused, then become catastrophically dependent upon, sometimes within the same generation. The potato is Andean. It was domesticated in the highlands of what is now Peru and Bolivia, in the region around Lake Titicaca, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago. The conditions there are extraordinary. Elevations above 3,000 meters, thin air, intense ultraviolet radiation, and temperature swings between day and night that would stress most agricultural crops to their limits. The Inca and their predecessors didn't merely grow potatoes in these conditions. They bred dedicated varieties for them, generation by generation, over millennia. By the time the Spanish arrived, Andean farmers had developed more than 3,000 distinct potato varieties. Not different names for the same thing, but genuinely distinct varieties, each suited to particular microclimates, with different flavors, textures, colors, and tolerances. Purple potatoes, red potatoes, yellow-fleshed varieties with flavor profiles that European breeds would not approach for centuries. Some were bred for high altitude, others for frost resistance, others for starch content or the ability to dry well. The diversity was deliberate, the product of a civilization that understood empirically what no single growing season can teach. You cannot predict which variety a coming pest or disease will target, so you grow many in different places, and the losses of one season are covered by the surpluses of another. The drying technology deserves its own moment of attention because it represents food science sophistication that the West would not match until the 20th century. At high altitudes in the Andes, temperatures drop below freezing at night even during summer. Andean farmers learned to exploit this. Spread potatoes on the ground overnight to freeze, stomp on them in the morning to press out the moisture, then dry them in the intense Andean sun over several days. The result was chuño, a freeze-dried potato that could be stored for years without spoiling and carried on trade routes across the Inca Empire. Chuño was a strategic food reserve, a trade commodity, and a ration for armies crossing mountain passes where nothing else could survive. They had essentially invented freeze-drying, a process that Western food science would present as a modern innovation some 4 centuries later. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Peru in 1532, they encountered a civilization that had spent millennia perfecting an agricultural system built on diversity and redundancy. They took the plant home without the knowledge that made it work. The Spanish brought the potato back to Europe sometime in the second half of the 16th century. The first recorded arrival was in the Canary Islands around 1567, followed by Spain itself. Then, a slow, contested spread northward through the continent over the following 100 years. Among the less celebrated transfers of the Columbian exchange, less dramatic than gold and less immediately profitable than sugar, it may nonetheless be the one with the greatest long-term consequence. Europe, for the most part, declined it. The potato grows underground, which in early modern European folk taxonomy associated it with darkness, the underworld, and things adjacent to the devil. The plant belongs to the Solanaceae family, the nightshades, which includes several genuinely toxic species, and European herbalists were not wrong to approach the family with caution, even if their fears about this particular plant were misplaced. The tubers looked unusual, the flowers were strange, and the plant does not appear anywhere in the Bible, which for some theologians of the period constituted evidence of something unnatural about it. In France, the Parlement de Besançon formally banned potatoes as a foodstuff in 1748, citing them as a cause of leprosy. Religious objections circulated in Britain. Across Protestant Northern Europe, the potato's association with Catholic Ireland and peasant poverty made it additionally suspect. For roughly 200 years, the most calorically dense and adaptable crop introduced to European agriculture sat largely unplanted, while Europeans periodically starved. The great famines of the 17th century, which killed millions across France, Britain, Germany, and Scandinavia, occurred while potato plants were available that could have prevented them. The famine of 1693 to 1694 in France alone killed an estimated 1.5 million people. That same plant would eventually feed the continent, but it was sitting in botanical gardens and the gardens of a handful of curious landowners while people died next to it. Antoine-Augustin Parmentier understood the potato. He had eaten it during a period of Prussian captivity in the 7 Years' War, been kept reasonably healthy on it while other prisoners suffered, and arrived home convinced that the French suspicion of the crop was costing lives. He spent much of his subsequent career trying to change that, running what turned out to be one of the stranger exercises in nutritional politics in the historical record. He sent bouquets of potato flowers to Louis XVI, who put one in his buttonhole. Marie Antoinette wore them in her hair at court. Within weeks, potato flowers were a fashion accessory at Versailles, which created demand, which created curiosity, which made ordinary French people ask what exactly these fashionable flowers were attached to. He planted a prominent potato field on the outskirts of Paris, posted guards around it conspicuously during daylight, and quietly withdrew them at night. Parisians broke in and helped themselves. He hosted a series of elaborate dinners at which every course was prepared from potatoes, inviting the scientists and public intellectuals whose opinions shaped educated Parisian taste. Benjamin Franklin reportedly attended one of these dinners and left favorably impressed. The menus Parmentier designed for these events have survived, and they are more inventive than anything most people associate with a root vegetable. The campaign worked slowly, and then all at once. By the time the revolution created shortages that made caloric density politically unavoidable, Parmentier had spent a decade making it respectable. The vegetable that the Parlement de Besançon had accused of causing leprosy became a food of the Republic. French potato dishes carry his name to this day: potage parmentier, hachis parmentier, a culinary monument to what was, examined clearly, an extended public relations operation on behalf of a root vegetable. The fact that it worked is itself instructive. The obstacle was never the food. The obstacle was the story people had told themselves about it. The adoption of the potato across Europe in the late 18th and early 19th centuries produced one of the most dramatic demographic shifts in the historical record. Between 1750 and 1850, Europe's population nearly doubled. Historians who have tried to decompose the causes of this growth have identified the potato as the single most important contributing factor, more consequential than any improvement in medicine, and more transformative than any reduction in warfare. A vegetable introduced 2 centuries earlier and refused for most of that time, powered the largest sustained population increase in European history. The mechanism is not complicated. A field planted in potatoes produces 2 to 4 times the caloric yield of the same field planted in grain. Potatoes also contain meaningful quantities of vitamin C, enough to prevent scurvy, alongside protein, potassium, and B vitamins. They are, calorie for calorie, among the most nutritionally complete foods available from a single plant source. A family that converted a portion of their land from grain to potatoes could feed themselves more reliably, with more caloric surplus to support children who would previously have died in infancy. The effect compounded across generations and across the continent, producing a population growth that historians would not fully explain until they began working backward from the numbers. In Ireland, this transformation happened faster and more thoroughly than anywhere else. The conditions of Irish tenant farming, where Catholic peasants worked land owned by Protestant English landlords, paid rent in cash, and kept what remained, made the potato not just attractive, but the only rational choice. A small plot planted with potatoes could feed a family. The same plot planted with grain had to be sold to pay the rent. There was no slack in the system, and no alternative crop that offered the same caloric return on limited soil. It consumed the agricultural margin that might otherwise have preserved some diversity in Irish diets. By the early 19th century, about a third of the Irish population was subsisting almost entirely on potatoes, eating 7 to 10 pounds per person per day. Nothing else, just potatoes. It provided enough nutrition to sustain that pattern, and Irish caloric intake on a potato diet was, by some measurements, higher than that of many European populations eating more varied food. Irish life expectancy and height measurements, 2 proxies for nutritional adequacy, improved during the period of peak potato dependence. The Irish population reached 8.2 million by 1841. The depth of the dependency was not visible as a problem until the dependency broke. In 1845, a water mold called Phytophthora infestans arrived in Ireland from North America, most likely in a shipment of seed potatoes. It spread through the wet Irish summer with terrifying speed. The crop failed. Then it failed again in 1846, and again in 1847, and again in 1848. The variety that the Irish population depended on most heavily, the Irish lumper, had almost no genetic resistance to the pathogen. Centuries of selecting for productivity on Irish soil had produced a potato population that was, in effect, a single genetic clone, reproduced by tuber rather than by seed. Replanted year after year from the same stock, it offered the pathogen virtually no variation to puzzle over. The failure of the lumper was not gradual. Fields that looked healthy one week turned black and putrid the next. the tubers dissolving into a foul-smelling slime before they could be harvested. Farmers who had dug their crop early to save it found the stored potatoes rotting in their cellars weeks later, the blight continuing its work underground. People who had eaten 7 to 10 pounds of potato a day and nothing else had no fallback, no stored grain, no cash reserves, no alternative crop that could be planted and harvested in time. They walked the roads looking for work that didn't exist, for food that wasn't there. In its early stages, this was a famine of disbelief. People waiting for the next crop to be different, for the system they had depended on to restore itself. The agricultural lesson embedded in the Irish famine is this: a population that depends on one variety of one crop has staked everything on a single point of failure. When that point fails, there is nothing else. Andean farmers had maintained 3,000 varieties precisely because no pathogen attacks everything equally. Some varieties die, others survive, and the system continues. Ireland had a single variety that nearly everyone ate, and one pathogen perfectly suited to eat it. The famine killed approximately 1 million people and drove another million to emigrate in its first 2 years alone. By 1855, the population had fallen from 8.2 million to 6.5 million. Emigration continued for decades, reducing the population to 4.4 million by 1900. Ireland is among the very few countries in the developed world whose population today remains lower than it was 180 years ago. A portion of those deaths came from the blight. The political response to it caused the remainder. And how many deaths fall into each category is still debated. Charles Trevelyan was the British Treasury official responsible for administering famine relief in Ireland. He believed, sincerely and apparently without irony, that the famine was a providential act, a judgment on Irish character, and an opportunity to correct the dependency on government assistance that he considered a root cause of Irish poverty. He also believed, with equal conviction, that government intervention in free markets was economically harmful and morally wrong, and he administered famine relief accordingly. Public works programs were created and then cut before the need had passed. Soup kitchens opened on the government's timetable and then closed on the government's timetable, not Ireland's. Food imports were organized at insufficient scale and discontinued before the famine had run its course. While Irish people starved, grain was being grown in Ireland and exported to England. The exports continued through the bulk of the famine years because the grain belonged to landlords, not tenants, and the structure of property law made confiscation incompatible with the principles Trevelyan was applying. Contemporary observers reported ships leaving Irish ports carrying grain while famine victims gathered at the docks. Some estimates suggest that the food produced in Ireland during the worst famine years, if redistributed rather than exported, could have sustained the population. Whether this is precisely accurate is contested. Food was undeniably leaving the country while people died inside it, and the administrative apparatus responsible for famine relief chose, repeatedly, the integrity of market mechanisms over the urgency of mass starvation. Trevelyan was knighted for his management of the relief operation. In 1848, while the famine was still ongoing, he published a book called The Irish Crisis, in which he described the event as the sharp but effective remedy of an all-wise providence. The Irish famine was a natural disaster that encountered a political framework built to prioritize property rights and market principles over mass survival. That blight was unavoidable. The choice about how to respond to it was not. How many deaths resulted from the pathogen and how many from the political response remains a subject of historical argument. The persistence of that argument, nearly 2 centuries later, is itself a measure of how far the catastrophe extended beyond a fungal infection in a potato field. The plant that Europe reluctantly adopted returned to North America in a form barely recognizable as what Spanish explorers had encountered in Peru. It had been carried to Europe, bred and modified across centuries of cultivation in entirely different soils and climates, and then brought back west, already transformed into something new. Henry Spalding, a Presbyterian minister doing missionary work among the Nez Perce in Idaho in the 1830s, was growing potatoes as a food crop, and the variety he cultivated became one of the progenitors of the Idaho russet. The russet Burbank was developed by Luther Burbank in Massachusetts in 1871. Selected for shape and friability. Long, uniform, low in sugar, high in starch, producing a reliable pale gold result in hot oil. It now dominates fast food globally. Burbank was working through systematic selection over generations, using the same basic method Andean farmers had used for millennia, but optimizing for a single commercial application rather than for diversity and resilience across unpredictable conditions. When Ray Kroc standardized McDonald's potato supply in the 1960s around the russet Burbank, he transformed the agricultural landscape of Idaho and eastern Washington. A McDonald's French fry has exact requirements: shape, starch content, moisture, sugar concentration at the moment of frying that must be met identically across tens of thousands of locations. Meeting those requirements at that scale meant growing the same variety, harvested to precise specifications, processed within a narrow window. Farmers who wanted McDonald's contracts learned to grow russet Burbanks or find other buyers. Processors calibrated their equipment, and seed suppliers focused their inventories accordingly. Idaho now produces about 30% of all U.S. potatoes, most destined for French fries, nearly all of them russet Burbanks. The standardization that made the McDonald's fry identical across 40,000 locations reproduced at industrial scale the same monoculture logic that had destroyed Ireland. One variety, one genetic profile, and a catastrophic vulnerability waiting for the right pathogen to find it. The International Potato Center in Lima, Peru, established in 1971 and known by its Spanish acronym CIP, maintains a gene bank of some 4,500 potato varieties, including wild relatives of the cultivated potato that would be unrecognizable to anyone who had only ever encountered a supermarket. The collection includes varieties with natural resistance to late blight, the same pathogen that destroyed the Irish crop, along with resistance to dozens of other diseases and pests. Some are adapted to drought conditions, others to waterlogged soils, others to temperature extremes that current commercial varieties cannot survive. The collection exists as insurance. The commercial potato market in the United States and the developed world broadly operates on perhaps 10 or 15 of those 4,500 varieties. The russet Burbank, the Yukon Gold, the Maris Piper in Britain. These account for the vast majority of what is grown, sold, and eaten. The rest of the diversity maintained at the CIP is not being grown or eaten anywhere at meaningful scale. It exists because someone understands that if a pathogen evolves to target the russet Burbank the way Phytophthora infestans targeted the Irish lumper, the world needs something to fall back on. The center is underfunded relative to what it is protecting. The commercial pressures that drive monoculture, the need for predictability and standardization across industrial supply chains, continue to narrow the genetic base of the crops the world depends on. Those 3,000 varieties, grown in the field rather than stored in a freezer, were insurance that paid out continuously rather than waiting to be activated in a crisis. They were grown, traded, and eaten, with diversity maintained not as a policy, but as a practice so embedded in daily life that it required no separate institution to protect it. That system of knowledge did not cross the Atlantic with the plant. The understanding that made it resilient stayed in the Andes. Frederick's trick worked because it changed how people thought about the potato, not the potato itself. Its problem, from the moment it arrived in Europe until the moment Europeans became desperate enough to eat it, was never nutritional. It was perceptual. The famines of the 17th century happened next to potato plants that were not being grown. The malnourishment of industrial workers in the early 19th century occurred despite a crop that could have substantially addressed it. People starved not because the potato couldn't feed them, but because it had been placed in the wrong category across every available mental framework. Root of the devil, food of pigs, cause of leprosy, food of the Catholic poor. No amount of nutritional fact was sufficient to move it until someone changed the frame. Parmentier understood this. Frederick had understood it before him. You do not argue someone into eating something they have decided is not food. You make them believe that someone else wants it badly enough to guard it. The same mechanism is narrowing the commercial potato market to a handful of varieties right now. The 4,500 in that collection in Lima are not absent from supermarkets because they cannot be grown. They are absent because the decisions driving commercial agriculture have defined what a potato needs to look like, taste like, and behave like in a supply chain. And everything outside those parameters has become economically invisible. This is not malice. It is the same perceptual narrowing that kept Prussian peasants hungry next to fields they wouldn't plant, operating through different mechanisms in a different century. A crop that sustained empires across 10,000 years in the Andes is now represented in the global food supply by a long, pale cylinder bred to meet the requirements of a 1960s fast food chain. The other 4,499 varieties are in a freezer in Peru, carefully maintained, waiting to matter again. Frederick's guards, this time, are not protecting something that power wants to keep to itself. They are standing watch over the memory of what was lost the last time someone decided that one variety was enough.